session. Items 1 through 6 are executive sessions and direction to staff. Mr. Clerk.
Your Honor, the first executive session is noticed as item 1, executive session Center for Biological Diversity versus City of Tucson, claim number 190954. It is being held pursuant to ARS section 38-431.03, A3 and A4. The second executive session is noticed as item 3, executive session Verdugo versus City of Tucson, Pima County Superior Court case number C20162949. It is being held pursuant to AR section 38-431.03, A3 and A4. The final executive session is noticed as item 5, executive session potential sale of Tucson Metro Chamber Building, 465 West St. Mary's Road. It is being held pursuant to ARS section 38-431.03, A3, A4, and A7.
I have a motion to go to executive session?
So move.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All right, let's do it. For those in the 75 to 90 minutes, so just so you know. and back in session. We do need a motion to return to study session.
So move.
Got a motion and second to return to study session. We have 3 items that we need to give instruction on. We'll just go in the order. What is council's pleasure for item number 2? Councilmember Fimbres, I think, Mr. Rankin?
For item number 2,
Well, we need
Mr.
to
Mayor,
come back in.
We're back in.
Yeah, we-
Oh, I guess I didn't, yeah.
No, we didn't vote.
Let's vote to come back into study session. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now we are. Somebody have a motion to make?
so Mr. Mayor, for item number 2, and this relates to the claim biological diversity versus City of Tucson, I'd ask for a motion that the mayor and council direct the city attorney and staff to proceed as discussed in executive session and to settle this property damage claim for the amount of $24,568.
So move.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on that matter? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion passes. Let's note that passes 6-0 and that Councilmember Romero recused herself on that item. Let's go on to item 4.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, with respect to this item, I would simply ask for a motion that the mayor and council direct the city attorney to proceed as discussed in executive session.
Got a motion and a second on that matter. Any other discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. That motion also passes 6-0. And note that Councilmember Romero is appearing by phone and so therefore cannot be a part of the executive session under our rules, so that's why it's a 6-0 vote. Let's move on to item 6.
And this is of the final executive session relating to the building at 465 West St. Mary's, and would just ask that the mayor and council give direction to the city manager to proceed as discussed in executive session.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on that matter? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? And the same note on item 6 as for item 4. Okay, now we will move on to item 7, which is the Tobacco 21 matter. I want to first confirm, Councilmember Romero, are you on the phone with us?
Yes, I am, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, great. Then let's proceed. Tobacco 21, set for 20 minutes. Councilmember Durham and Cunningham have requested discussion of a proposed ordinance to raise the age to purchase tobacco products to 21. Councilmember Durham.
This morning I attended a Board of Supervisors meeting. After a lengthy discussion, they voted 3-2 to continue the issue to the second meeting in September. Unfortunately, several of the board members brought up, frankly, unfounded concerns, and I'm not certain they will ever pass Tobacco 21. I'm extremely disappointed that after over a year of discussion and polling that showed that almost 70% of our constituents support this, they were unable to move forward. The direction this council gave last year was clear. The city should lead on this. Of course, it would be helpful if the county came along, but they proved to be difficult partners today. We should not shirk away from our responsibility to help the kids of Tucson. It is our duty to act to address the vaping epidemic, and this is an evidenced way to do that. We've also had helpful feedback from retailers recently, and I think we can amend the ordinance slightly to address their concern. I want to remind everybody that there's a store in Ward 3 down the street from Flowing Wells High School that's been caught selling tobacco products to minors by the Attorney General's office 6 times in the last 4 years. They're still selling cigarettes today. That's unacceptable. With that, I move that we should continue item number 11 from tonight's agenda and direct staff to redraft the ordinance with the City of Tucson taking over enforcement power for consideration at the first meeting in September. I also direct staff to sit down with the retail community one more time and discuss an enforcement regime that fulfills our need to weed out the bad apples who blatantly sell to kids without being overly burdensome to the business community, particularly the retailers.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
I was going to second it for purposes of discussion. I have a couple questions.
Yeah,
Sure.
Likewise, but I.
As do I.
second it.
Let me tell you my preference, and it could potentially be incorporated into the motion. I would like to work with the county on this. The model that we set up was really dependent upon county participation. I don't know why that third vote wasn't there today. I just don't know. But I think we've all heard some of the retailers' concerns, and if we can address those concerns and work with the county and perhaps get the county to go along with that model, that would be clearly preferable. I'm not against if the county, is just not going to move, re-looking at this for us, but I do think it's going to take some work. Perhaps we can do it in 30 days. I mean, I'm perfectly happy. I know the county's going to 45 days. I'm perfectly happy to re-look at this in 30 days and just see where we're at, but I don't know that I'm prepared to say absolutely in 30 days we're going to do this, because what would be the best outcome is in 30 days us and the county are on the same page, and we move from there. But that's my. Councilmember Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with you that working with the county would make it easier for enforcement purposes to have everything within the Pima County on the same page in terms of enforcement. Would, Mr. Durham, would it be inclusive of smoke shops and vaping stores, or is it just or would you include that as part of the review of what should be included in such an ordinance? Because that's where a lot of that can stem from.
I believe the smoke shops are already regulated by state law to a certain extent, and this would raise the age for the sale of tobacco products from 18 to 21. The intent all along has been to treat vape shops and tobacco smoke shops the same, and so we can certainly look into that and determine whether they are treated the same. But that's been the goal.
Yeah, I think in the model ordinance that we have in front of us, the vape shops are included. I mean, that was important. Councilmember Kozaczek. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not. Councilmember Scott.
I'd like to know if in the city's version, if we're going to include the police department and or the sheriff's department, because currently we have a mix-up of that. I'd like that clarified as part of this.
That's part of what the 30 days will have to address. These
are some of the more important issues with regard to how to grasp a hold of this. I think people at this table, I do say so, I don't think there's anybody sitting here who would like to see children accessing these products. That's not the issue. The issue is on the other side of this equation, which is the business side of it, and how to handle that and make it work for all parties. I haven't seen, or I'm not sure of how this will be paid for. Is it assumed that a license fee would cover all the costs incurred in this? I haven't seen that. So those are the kinds of lingering questions that I would like to ask about that. Also, would the city be interested in moving forward with cooperation with others who are trying to make this a state and/or federal issue and get it sort of universal rather than just locally handled. So I'd like to ask if we as a city would be interested in cooperating with others who are working on this issue at higher level.
Councilmember Kozaczek.
So a few things. First of all, the ordinance that, or the IGA that we were going to move forward with did have a funding mechanism tied into it. It was going to work out to about $290 for a permit that covered the county's cost of doing enforcement. That all made sense. It was a region-wide thing. Our concerns, whenever we looked at this the first time, were on the lines of who's going to enforce it, how, if it's TPD, how do they have the bandwidth to do it? What's the cost going to be? Do they really have the staffing, and should that be what they're doing? But so when the county signed on to this thing, it made sense because the county has the people in place, the county health department to go out. The permit made sense. What we heard from the business community was they didn't like the penalties, and I think there are several of us at the table just speculating that we're prepared to ratchet back some of the penalties from, for instance, for the third offense from 6 months to 3 months. City of Flagstaff has four different levels, and at the fourth offense, you lose your license for 3 years. So, I mean, this is not as though we were considering a particularly draconian set of measures. I'm concerned, though, that if we're going to move forward in 30 days, we'll be jumping the gun, and the county won't have had an opportunity to really kind of reconsider what I think were a couple of their concerns, and the primary one being the level of penalty. And if we could just check that box with them and move forward with the permit fees and ratchet back the penalties a bit, we may be there. And I think that for the reasons that Shirley is intimating, that the city going it alone is going to be a tough lift. I also, though, don't want to wait on the state, because the reality is probably that the state is going to come in a year or two and preempt us anyway and water this whole thing down the same way they did with texting and the handheld. So let's lead by example. But let's give the county an opportunity to be a part of the conversation, and maybe wait until our second meeting or whenever, our next meeting after their next meeting.
Councilmember Durham.
Frankly, the swing vote on the Board of Supervisors is Sharon Bronson. Mm-hmm. And this will give us a time to figure out where she stands. If that's capable of being figured out, and we can always continue the matter to the second meeting in September. It's my intent to work with the Board of Supervisors, work with Pima County, because a Tucson-Pima County solution is the best one.
So I agree with that. When is their next meeting?
I think we're on
They
this.
have 2 meetings in September, the same days as ours.
Did they punt this to a particular meeting?
The second meeting in September.
Then I would offer a substitute motion that says we don't act on this until after they have had their meeting, so we can operate in concert.
So the motion is to, essentially, Councilmember Durham's motion, but the amendment is to move ours to the second meeting in September.
Contiguous with theirs.
Okay.
Contemporaneously with theirs.
All right, well, hold on. I guess he's the motion maker, so.
No, I offered a substitute motion.
Oh, substitute motion, okay, then is there a second? Okay. So now we've got something new on the table. Councilmember Durham.
I think the continuing to the first meeting in September puts us in the driver's seat. It applies some pressure on Pima County, on the Board of Supervisors, and it gives us the maximum flexibility.
So my response to that is that if we're working with them in a partnership, we ought to not preempt them and come back with a city-only solution before they've had a chance to reconsider a regional solution.
Yeah, Councilman Cunningham.
So there's a few things coming on here. Number one is we had multiple discussions that started with kids. The main thing is that we have seniors in high school buying cigarettes and distributing them, not necessarily selling them, but sharing them with kids and classmates and such who are under 18. This became a problem. It's what the whole Tobacco 21, which is a national movement, has kind of been behind that site. Not only that, it, quite frankly, it does increase total healthcare risk of a community. We don't need to go down all the factors of why Tobacco 21 is a good idea. But we did talk about retail concerns, and we also talked about what I like to call the drive down the street effect. In other words, our bigger problem then becomes, okay, you can't buy anything in the city limits, so now you're going to go drive down the street and cross the county line and buy it somewhere else. That's why we collaborated with the county. At this point, there are some concerns about that the retailers have brought up that definitely merit discussion, but it sounds to me like I don't know whether or not we can get there with the county or not. The bottom line is I don't understand why we'd have a meeting September, the first meeting in September, if they're not even going to discuss it until the second meeting of December. We can much more easily make suggestions to them offline than have a whole other meeting about it. Also, we'll probably be in the afternoon, and maybe this was kind of like a dress rehearsal. We'll have a dual ordinance and IGA that makes sense in the next 45 days and take another run at it. If we can't do it after that one, at that time, maybe it's time for the city to decide whether or not to go it alone. But we'll give the county one more chance and see if they can get their act together.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Paul.
I agree with Councilman Cunningham and Councilman Kozachik. And I know that the county has some concerns about the penalties and also about the enforcement. And that's what I have concerns about, how we're going to enforce this issue. And also added to the discussion, and like Councilman Cunningham says, people go to other areas to purchase these, and then you'll see a lot of increases in where they're at now with Tobacco Barn and some of these other places where they go off of the city or the county property. So I think we need to look at what the county's doing. I think it's going to lower the costs of what we have and the enforcement. And I think you got the health department there with the county also. So I'd like to wait and see what they're going to be doing before we can modify our proposals to what theirs is.
I'll go back to Councilman Durham for a second.
So, Councilmember Kozachik, does that mean your motion is after the second meeting in September, after the Board of Supervisors addresses the issue? Could that be the second meeting in September or the first meeting in October?
When's their next meeting?
September,
Or when's the meeting they're going to vote on this on?
the second meeting in September.
Same day as our second
Same
meeting.
day as ours then, same day. We don't need to punt till October. We can do exactly what Paul just said. They meet at 9 o'clock, we meet at 2 o'clock. We can riff off of their vote.
This is kind of where I'm at. If we can get all our ducks in a row by that time, I think we can have an ordinance that makes sense for the whole community, including the retailers and all the people who live outside the city limits. The bottom line is that we'll try to make that happen. If we're really, really close, look, it's an art, not a science. If we're really, really close, we may have to punt till the first meeting of October if it's not there. But the bottom line is that at that point, it becomes a situation where I'll make the commitment to go it alone if we have to. I don't really want to go down that path if it's not necessary. In the meantime, I'd like to call the question, Councilmember Kozachik's question. Call the question for Councilmember Kozachik's motion.
Is that where Councilmember Romero, the question got called, but go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just want to make sure that that I'm clear on the next steps. Who from staff in the city of Tucson is going to work with Pima County staff to make sure that all stakeholders are on the table and that the city and Pima County are working together for this?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Romero, that would be out of my office.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Office.
Okay. Question's been called. I'll let you go one more time.
Clarifying question. Is my motion intact except for the change from the first meeting in September to the second meeting?
Right.
Okay.
The substitute motion was to bump this back so that we're operating contiguously with the county and not going it alone.
Oh, it's a separate motion. Okay.
Yeah, it got substituted out. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Got 45 days to try to get a good ordinance, so we'll work on it. Thanks. All right, let's move on then to item 8, which is development impact fees, scheduled for an hour. Staff has an update on the development impact fee program. I see Mr. Clark coming to the table with his brain trust. This is to the manager. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, this is our ongoing discussion on the development of impact fees and the update of the impact fees for your consideration. I know that we've tried to brief you, and this is again a part of the ongoing conversation. We did allocate 1 hour. We don't know that it'll take that long. We'll go over a brief overview of what we've done to date and then open it up to questions and comments from the group. With that, I'll turn it over to Scott Clark, our Plan and Development Services Director.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council. With me today, I have Principal Planner Elisa Hamblin, who's been the primary staff working on this. And in the audience, I've got Judy Harland. She is with Tischler Bice, and if there gets something that's outside of our technical expertise, she can step up and answer that. Just to give you a quick background, this Arizona revised statute requires that cities come back and amend their infrastructure improvement plans, their land use assumptions, and then subsequently their impact fees based on those plans and assumptions. Ours were last done in August of 2014, so we are in this process now that began a year ago. This process has included selecting professional services of Tischler Bice in a collaborative manner. We had Southern Arizona Home Builders Association, the Metro Pima Alliance, the Chamber of Commerce, and also the Living Streets Alliance set in on the RFP process, so they helped select that consultant. Over the past 4 years, stakeholders have met 4 times with staff and consultants to inform and shape this process. A 5th meeting is being planned for late August. What we're asking for today from Council is to authorize staff to publish the draft infrastructure improvement plan, the land use assumptions, and the draft fees that will be shaped as a result of your guidance today. Elisa will be briefing the changes we made based on Council's guidance from April 9th in regards to service areas, the project list, trip exchange districts, and draft fees. So with that, I'm going to go over and turn it over to Elisa Hamblin, who will take you through a presentation.
Honorable Mr. Mayor and members of the Council, thank you for having me here today to discuss this update on impact fees. Today's discussion will focus on a few things. We're going to recap what we talked about last time with Council. We're going to talk about some different options that we'd like to look at on a number of items. We're going to look at the proposed fee structure and the project list of items that will actually be constructed with impact fees. Again, to repeat what Scott said, the direction we're seeking from Council today is on the options that we'll be presenting, and then permission to post our draft report online and start an extensive public process working with stakeholders to make refinements to that report over the next few months. So on the screen, I've recapped what the direction was that we previously heard from Mayor and Council. We last met in April. We discussed service areas, the draft project list, and feedback from individual meetings that we had. The direction overall was to not pursue a single service area, to come back with some options to Mayor and Council. There was also a request to include the estimated fees in the discussion so we could look at the whole picture altogether. Since that time, we've actually had 2 stakeholder meetings. We met with stakeholders in April and in June. We've received questions about who these stakeholders are. They are members of the development community that are typically paying the impact fees. So this has included MPA, SABA, the Chamber of Commerce, Arizona Multi-Housing Association, and others in the development community, including local developers, engineering firms, and others. We have had 4 meetings with them. They gave us very similar feedback the last 2 times that we've met with them, that they would like to see the draft report released so that they can offer meaningful feedback on that. They would like to see different options as well. We have shown them similar information to what Council will be receiving today as far as the fee amounts, and I'll discuss about that more as we continue forward. So before I jump into a lot of the technical information, we're going to run through two fee schedules. The first is for residential. The second is for non-residential development. This chart that I've included on this screen is to kind of set the stage for a shift in our residential fee schedule. So right now, when you build a new housing unit in the city of Tucson, you are paying fees based on the type of unit it is. So if it's a single family home, if it's an apartment, if it's a townhouse, it pays a different fee. We're proposing to look at our fees by size. And so this is the census data that actually shows the size of the home influences how many people live there, and therefore how many trips they are generating and demand on our street system. So the shift to looking at fees by size is directly related to what the average number of people that live there is. Whereas right now, it's not a direct relationship. So on the next table, and I'll point out kind of what's happening here. Sure.
That was one of the questions. So what information are we supposed to get out of that slide?
So I have just had questions and conversations with stakeholders and council regarding where the actual breakdown is, like why a fee amount changes when you get to a larger home size.
All right.
So this is the data showing that the larger the home is in size. So for instance, if you look at 2751 to 3000, that's the breaking point where you get more than 3 people in a household,
Okay.
and your trips go up.
Got it.
Sorry. There we go. So this table actually shows what the proposed fees would be in relation to that. The green column is the total fee as proposed or analyzed by our consultants Tischler Bice at this time. The column immediately to the right of that in gray that says the phase-in fee rate, that is our current fee. So a little bit of clarification on that. When we adopted our fee schedule 5 years ago, there was a phase-in rate that was initially planned to just be in effect for a year, but it subsequently has been renewed every single year, so it is still our current fee rate. The other gray column that says the full adopted fee rate, that is what our previous consultants 5 years ago had said you could go to if you were going to go the full amount, but again, we have stayed at the phase-in rate. That is the current fee. So in comparison, you can kind of see the increase or the decrease based on the analysis of our consultants for this new fee and what it is today with the phase-in fee. There is a reduction until you get up about to 2,000 square feet or so, and then after that it goes up incrementally. And again, that's based on the information I showed you on the last slide, which is the number of people per based on the size of the home and how many trips they generate. So we have received some feedback, and I'd like to discuss potentially about grouping some of these categories together. So right now it's broken out in 250 square foot increments. If we wanted to collapse those categories, we could do so, and that's something we can continue to study and work with stakeholders on and council if that's an option. But this is the straight analysis that our consultants have provided to us at this point.
And they have a study on the generation of trips, the 250 square feet, that will back up the...
Honorable Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Cunningham, that is correct. So when we release the draft report, it will demonstrate all of the analysis that has gone into the justification of those numbers.
Could I ask a quick question on the word under type?
Mm-hmm.
Starting at 1,501 square feet, is that what that means? And up to 4,000 in that column, in that first column?
Mm-hmm.
Comparing the full adopted rates, the amount that you pay for a fee for a 1,500 square foot home versus a 4,000 square foot home, it's the same amount, $10,000.
Correct. Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Scott, that is correct because it's based on type. So the way that our consultants have done this analysis is that saying single family, that's what we charge for now. They are using this 1,500 square feet all the way to 4,000 as the category that was previously single family, comparing it to the size on this table. So regardless of the size of home that you build now, if it's 1,500 square feet or 4,000, you pay the same fee amount. in our current schedule. And we're proposing to have a graduated increase for the larger that you get.
So this could affect someone moving in, wanting to move into a 1,500 square foot home by having the same $10,000 added to the cost of the house. It might make some of these houses not affordable.
Actually
That's fine.
reduces.
And so,
So the proposal is the column in green, and so if
Okay,
that number would increase
That's
slightly the larger you get.
okay.
yeah,
That's-
it looks like what you've done is, on the smaller houses, the rates will actually go down from what's current, and on the larger houses, they will go up by anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, $2,500.
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
And we're not at the full adopted rates, we're at the phase-in rates anyway, and so the increase is going to be less than.
Right.
And then one last thing I'd like to mention on this is, as I've kind of already said, regardless of the home size, you pay this kind of flat rate right now. So what that's actually doing is kind of tamping down the possibility to develop smaller units and more affordable units within the community, because if you want to build a smaller second unit, perhaps on a lot, and put your grandma in it, you're paying $7,000 to $8,000 in impact fees. In this proposal, something that's 750 square feet, 1,000 square feet, you're going to pay half of that, basically.
And so here's some of the stuff that I have. I'm thinking about the Rob Hill project. We had a significant number of people they built basically a single-family residence, but they built kind of the mother-in-law program with the kitchenette. Is that going to count as 2 residents, or would that be 1?
So
Just kind of asking that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to get into we've kind of got into the details here. We have a very significant sliding scale. There's also some things in where I'm not sure we can where it's necessary. As far as the streets piece, I understand the sliding scale with the more people living, and so there's more. But on the Parks and Recreation piece, I kind of have some other questions. I also want to think about park usage, and then also land value and usage, because there's certain incentives in promoting larger homes being built, especially on the east side. Now, I'm not saying that's the case everywhere, but there's some stuff I'm just kind of thinking about as we move forward in this process.
So let me kind of take this to the end, and we can come back and have the discussion through to the beginning. My understanding is the direction staff's asking for today is to take this proposal, or a proposal very similar to it, depending on what we do at the table, and take it out for public discussion. And this matter will ultimately come back to us after we've all had that opportunity to hear the public discussion. Is that accurate?
yeah.
Honorable Mayor and Council, that's correct.
Okay. Councilmember Fimbres.
Mr. Mayor, did I hear you right? How long will the discussion take? How many meetings will we have? Will we have the retail and the business community involved?
What's you hop to the end, I guess. What's the schedule?
What does it look like?
So, Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Fimbres, so we will not ask council for any action on any of these items for 3 months from now, assuming we get authorization to publish our draft report. So we are scheduling another stakeholder meeting for the end of this month, and then we will continue to have stakeholder meetings as needed to iron out any issues as we go forward. Right now, our schedule is to come back to mayor and council for a public hearing in October and then vote in November. So we still have 3 months roughly from today before we are asking for any action.
Councilman Durham, do you have something? I saw.
Yeah. What is your recommendation on the combination of the categories?
Honorable Mayor and
You mean the collapsing?
Councilmember Durham,
Okay.
I honestly have not done that analysis yet. We're still working on it, and that's something that we will continue to look at over the next few months before we make a final recommendation on that.
Councilman Kosacic.
Yeah, similarly, the justification of this, though, is that there is some analysis that I guess our consultants have brought forward to say this is approximately where the breaks occur in terms of the number of people living in the homes. And so to Paul's earlier question was that if there are 2 1,000 square foot houses on a particular property, it's the impact fee times 2, because it's per housing unit, because that numbers of people will be living in each unit, which makes intuitive sense.
That is correct, yep.
Okay. All right, keep going.
Okay, so I'm going to move us forward onto the non-residential fee schedule. So currently, we charge non-residential fees in 3 categories: industrial, commercial, and office. And that's for everything built inside of the city that is not a residential use. Those are kind of catch-all categories. We adopted those categories 5 years ago, and I can tell you in practice, it's really challenging to make everything fit within those 3 categories. There are things that just don't naturally fall there. And so what we are proposing is to add some new categories into our fee schedule. I have 4 listed on the screen, but I have heard back from stakeholders that we might potentially add some more in there, especially in the commercial category, to give some nuance between the sizes of different types of commercial and the impacts that they have on the system. Similarly, I've heard from that industrial may need to be broken out into a couple of categories as well. So that's another item we will continue to study. But as of right now, we have 4 proposed that are 3 that are institutional uses and 1 that's a hotel use, which are not in our current fee schedule.
Councilmember Kozaczek.
I think breaking out the commercial makes sense. I mean, just a laundromat's going to generate fewer trips than a Circle K, but they'd both be captured under commercial right now. So I think that makes sense, and it would also affect the next frame where you expanding the commercial means changes to the fee schedules as well.
Thank you.
Aren't religious facilities, how would you describe that? I thought religious facilities were exempt from taxes.
Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Scott, they are not. So I can give you a recent example. I had a church facility that was adding a youth service area for their youth group, and we don't have a natural category that falls into. The best we could offer them was an office use, so they actually had to go and do a study to justify what they should pay in fees, which is what our code allows.
I think, Councilmember Scott, they may be exempt from certain property taxes, but not from impact fees. Okay.
So what these categories may look like on a fee schedule is here. Again, the proposed fee amount is in green. This is based on the analysis by our consultants, Tischler Bice. The column immediately next to that is the phase-in fee rates. Again, that is our current fee. So you can see comparatively what that looks like. What we have heard concern on is the commercial category. The difference between what our proposed fee is and our current fee is roughly $2,400 higher per 1,000 square feet. So that's where we will do some more looking to see if we could break that out maybe into some more nuanced categories. And a note on the phase-in fee rate. This is very common, I think, in other communities as well, that there's a fee rate that's proposed. And if council wants to make a policy decision on whether to pull that back or to phase things in, they can do so. And that's what happened last time. So there is some more conversation to be had on all of these categories for sure. And as I mentioned, we could also still break it into more groupings as we go forward. But this is our draft at this point. The concern I've also heard is that raising the commercial fee is going to inhibit economic growth or our major employers. So I've put some examples on the screen of what these actually different uses entail. So commercial is retail. When we use that term, it means retail and restaurant type uses. Major employers such as Geico or Amazon or Caterpillar, they are all going to be office or industrial uses typically, because that's the type of actual trip generation that comes out of that. You can see that like the Banner Hospital, and we have new hospital facilities going in the community, they would be in that healthcare category, which we don't have now, again. So these are just some examples to illustrate what that really is on the ground. The next item I would like to discuss is the Trip Exchange District. We have talked with council, mayor and council on this previously. The Trip Exchange District is an idea where if a development can demonstrate that they are putting less demand on the system by having reduced trips, they could potentially have reduced fees. So if you have a project that potentially is on a transit network or is a mixed-use development, and you know they're not going to be driving as much as everybody else, they pay a lower fee rate. You can establish this kind of a trip exchange district in a specific geographic area if you can demonstrate that that area generates less trips, or you can have it float, which is why we have been using the term floating zone, where it can apply anywhere throughout the city as long as certain criteria are met. So we don't need decision today on what these criteria are. What I would like to hear is if this is a policy direction we'd like to go. So potentially you could say if a project was in a quarter mile of a transit stop, or if it's in a mixed use area as designated on Plan Tucson, or if it has a minimum number of residential units and commercial, it's a true mixed use, and it meets these one or more of these criteria, then it could pay reduced impact fees. I have had a question from stakeholders about what that actual amount of reduction might be. Based on our consultants' work, they're saying somewhere between 10 and 20% reduction potentially if you were establishing this kind of a trip exchange district.
I'd like to point out that during this float versus non-float, it's based on trips, and it immediately penalizes Ward 4 because we do not have the option of the bus system or any other kind of public transportation at this time at the level that we should. In other parts of the city, there is that accessibility, and so we're penalized right off the bat, and I don't think that's fair. I'd like that to be addressed.
Okay. Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Scott, it doesn't necessarily have to be due to transit. You could make it other criteria, so you may not have to meet all 4 of these that are on the screen. You could meet one of them, and that's, again, a policy discussion we would like to have at a future date when we narrow those down a little bit. If it's a mixed-use project, for instance, and regardless of where it's located, it could be potential for that reduction.
I appreciate that, but it's been my mantra for the last 24 years that everything that applies beautifully elsewhere has not applied very well to Ward 4.
So I'm going to move us on to service areas, which was a next topic we spent considerable time discussing at our previous mayor and council meeting. We heard a lot of concerns about service areas, and so the options we're presenting today are based on trying to address some of those concerns. So as a reminder, police and fire right now function on a citywide service area. That is not recommended to change. Keep that the same. Where we have the discussion is on streets and parks. So currently, streets and parks both have 5 service areas. They're the same boundaries. We are proposing that either streets goes to 3 service areas or an option for 1 citywide area and 3 service areas. I'll explain how that will function in just a minute. And then on parks, we're seeking direction on 2 options, which is 3 service areas or 5 service areas, which is our current configuration. So what roughly we are proposing this may look like, you can see on the screen, the wards are kind of in the gray background of the map. If we did 3 service areas, we would roughly group 2 wards together in each area. The rationale for this is actually when I've gone back and looked at all the development activity in the city in the last 5 years, if we group it this way, each of these areas would have roughly 1/3 of the development activity. It would also mean that when you are trying to prioritize projects that are being built in your area, you have 1 council member that you can discuss prioritization with. We anticipate, because of the way that Tucson has been growing, that this share of growth will remain relatively similar into the future, so roughly 1/3, as I've mentioned. That's not to say the same kind of development is happening across the city. There's different kinds of development happening in different places, but the actual dollar valuation impact fees paid is roughly 1/3. But it is happening everywhere. So with the street system, what we would request feedback on is if we put a citywide layer on top of this. And the reason to do that would be to fund larger regional scale projects, including RTA projects, with that citywide bucket. That helps alleviate some concerns we've heard from council regarding RTA funding. So currently in our service area boundaries that we have, a lot of the, I would say a majority of the impact fees that have been collected are going to fund the city match for RTA. If we set aside a separate fund, a citywide fund for regional projects that separates out that money and gives us a collection of a fund within a specific area that then can be spent more on local projects. So it's creating a system where we can achieve both goals of funding regional and local. So again, we're seeking direction on whether that is a relevant option in the eyes of mayor and council. So the project list, we also spent some time discussing previously.
Do you want that now?
Yeah, I mean, as I see it, there's a couple, well, there's a whole set. I think they're saying, hey, can we go out forward with this? But the differences from what we're doing up to now is, you know, let's do residential by size, which seems like a great idea. Let's look at more categories, which seems like a great idea. Let's look at the floating zone, which seems like a great idea. Let's look at the trip exchange district, which is also a good idea. The idea of having a regional zone, I think, is critical going forward. And I think I wasn't as aware, but at least you just said it. You know, if most of our impact fees are going to match our RTA projects now, let's figure out a systematic way. This is what's going to go to RTA. This is what's going to go to local projects. And I think those are principally the changes. But so why don't we go through the whole list, and then we'll come back and see if we can get some consensus. I know one of the things that's important, if I'm a council person, is the project list. And it's not so much that the project list can't be changed because they built flexibility into it. But if you see something there that isn't, if you see something that isn't there, we probably ought to get it in. So I'd wait, I guess, is a very long answer to your question. Unless you want, let's wait. Okay, go ahead, Alicia.
So the project list, to backtrack a little bit, our current project list was adopted 5 years ago. It was pretty long. We anticipated a lot of growth happening in the city that didn't come to fruition at the rate that we thought it would. So some projects didn't get built or weren't funded fully because we just grew a little bit slower. Our consultants have done what's known as a land use assumptions or a growth assumptions analysis, looking at what we think we're going to grow in the future. They have estimated roughly 27,000 people and 23,000 jobs in the next 10 years. I would say that's kind of a medium-high estimate. They've been working with us at the city pretty closely to see what actual permit activity has been, where development's happening, so we could get to that number. So if we grew by 27,000 people and 23,000 jobs, Fire would need roughly 16,000 square feet of additional facility space. They would need 10 new apparatus. So our project list, which we've included in the packet today, outlines that need, that potential need. And then we've tried to build flexibility into this list that you can spend impact fees at these locations as indicated, or others due to growth demands. So the reason we have structured it this way is to be more responsive to growth. It can happen in unanticipated locations. Tucson is a urbanizing city. We are seeing development across the whole entire community. It's not just on the periphery or not just downtown, it's everywhere. So sometimes we see things come up like the Benedictine Monastery. Who would have thought 5 years ago that that was going to turn into that many residential units? Because our project list is so rigid right now, we can't respond to that growth. So we are proposing to structure our project list with this in this format that it may be at these other locations or others due to growth, so we can be more responsive. Police, similarly, we are estimating roughly 42,000 square feet of facilities, 60 vehicles or equipment could be at the southeast annex to substation build-out. That would be the first priority as of right now from the police. But if some of that needs to be allocated within the system due to growth, then we would look at that. I'm going to walk you through parks and streets, which are laid out similarly. So parks over 10, So over 10 years, we're saying roughly 1,000 new park amenities. That's kind of a catch-all category. 33 acres of parkland and over 3,000 square feet of rec center. And that's, again, just based on our growth assumptions. If we grow more than the consultants have projected, we can build more. It's in their methodology. So again, we've heard from council members that priorities for park acquisition and rec center expansions or new rec centers should be in the areas of residential growth where it's happening the most. So we've put that in the project list. And then we've identified potential projects in each of the 3 service areas that the impact fee dollars could be spent at. But again, it can be at others as needed due to growth. I will also say with the caveat, there are pretty strict regulations in the state statutes regarding how you can spend impact fees for parks. You can only spend it on certain size parks, certain size rec centers. You can't build an aquatic center. So this list is designed to be responsive to that. And as we go forward, we'd always have to make sure we were in compliance with state statute. The last category is streets. If we grow at the pace that we're projecting, we would need approximately 70 additional lane miles in the city. I've put up on the screen the option with the citywide projects and then potential projects in each of the other 3 areas. You will see the list in the citywide includes all of the RTA projects that the city has committed funds to, but I've also included language that other projects can be identified based on our upcoming mobility master plan, which is the transportation department is working on, development impacts and capacity improvements as related to growth. So the last thing I have is a slide about accountability. I want to offer some reassurance about how impact fees are actually spent and used. Impact fees can only be spent in the area where they are collected. That's a legal requirement, and only on projects identified in the project list. We are hoping to establish more coordination with our capital improvement program so that there will be an annual reporting process to come back to council and have discussions about those prioritization of projects and funding as we move forward.
So there'll be a list or documentation that shows that fees raised in this area are be used in this area, and we can show that to the community.
Honorable Mayor and Council, yes, we've discussed that with finance, and they're prepared to set up a fund that shows each service area and where the funds go and how they're allocated.
So we're going to have 3 districts and 2 per ward, or 1 per 2 wards, and we'll be able to track and show a trail where the funding was created.
Honorable Mayor and Council, that's correct.
Okay.
Don't we already have that? Can't we already track most of where our impact fees were generated?
Honorable Mayor and Council Member Cunningham, we do track by service areas right now because that's how our system is set up. We don't track it by wards necessarily because it's a different structure. Lastly, just on timeline, what we're seeking from council today is direction to publish a draft report, feedback on the options we've given you today so we can get that report out. Public hearing is tentatively scheduled for October and adoption in November. We anticipate extensive stakeholder input and feedback over the next several months to get to a refined product that we feel meets the needs of the stakeholders and those in our community and the desires of mayor and council. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks.
Okay, I'm going to, looks like we got a lot of people. That was Councilmember Romero. We'll start there. Councilmember Romero?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate it. I am generally in agreement with you in terms of the options that we have, the service areas floating districts, putting apart money for regional projects and money into maintenance and rebuild of our current street infrastructure. My question is about the list, the project list, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of our concerns with the project list, specifically project lists for parks and streets. Are these project lists, can we add to the project list till the end of the process that you're having? Scott?
Honorable Mayor and Council, until you adopt it, you can continue to refine the project list based on input from the public and based on input from Council.
Well, go ahead, Renina. One of the things you've talked about is building in flexibility. So what does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, we've got a set of projects. Sure, we've got till November, but 2 years from now, something's happened different. And I thought you were trying to find a way to build in flexibility. How's that going to work?
Honorable Mayor and Council, so other communities have used a similar approach where you just identify we need this much square footage, and then instead every year with their capital improvement program, they identify the specific projects. We have put a list on our draft just to show what it could be spent on, but again, it can be flexible based on the information from our consultants, as long as we are within the confines of what impact fees can actually be used on.
Okay. Councilman Romero, do you have more? I'm sorry to interrupt. Guess not. We'll go down the line and we'll come back this way this time. Looks like everybody's in. Councilmember Kozaczek.
If we're including a citywide streets service area option, how do you square that with the requirement that Richard was asking about, that there be a nexus between where the money is spent versus where it's generated?
Honorable Mayor and Council, you can make that nexus because the projects in the citywide fund are regional level projects that benefit everyone inside the entire city. So there is a relationship there. We had previously discussed with Council the option of even doing a citywide streets fund for everything, which obviously didn't work out, but there is a rational argument to be made, and I might actually defer to our consultant, Julie, if she would like to discuss a little bit more on that.
Consultant.
So, and to bring a little bit more clarity, what we're thinking is it's going to be roughly 35 cents per dollar, 35 to 40 cents per dollar that would go towards that regional fund.
Go ahead. The question, I guess, is
how do you justify a nexus between where the dollars are generated versus where they're spent? If the project is downtown and you're building Houghton Road with it, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, let me give you one. I don't know how familiar you are with our community, but looking at your list, Grant Road, okay, Santa Rita to Swan. Sounds a lot like Wards 3 and maybe Ward 6 to me.
Almost a 2.
Almost a 2. So how are you able to say then that that's a community-wide benefit?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some input to the process and discussion. And yeah, so those projects that are identified on the RTA project list are considered regional, system-level, arterial level projects that do provide a thoroughfare type movement of vehicles, of persons through the city, and so that is the connection between a regional fee, a citywide collection, and those projects specifically.
Okay, I understand that. They're also being paid for by half-cent sales tax that the voters approved, and so I'm not sure I'm going to be supporting a citywide streets impact fee, because to argue in the alternative is that let's focus, just as we're with parks, let's focus on the area that the dollars are being generated in. On the project list, explain how the project lists interplay with Props 101 and 407, and if we're including this and any and all others, why have a list at all?
Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Kozaczek, we've had that question about the Prop 407 project. So the voters have approved a set project list related to Prop 407. Impact fees could potentially be used at the same location, but they would be for a different purpose. So the dollars that have already been identified to be spent through Prop 407 will continue in their current programming and configuration. Impact fees would be used in addition to that. I can say that the park's need for capacity improvements as due to growth is greater than what could be funded only through Prop 407. So this is an additional revenue source. But again, there's also different things you can use them for. So Prop 407 does include some maintenance, repair, things like that that are based to deficiencies of our current system. Impact fees can only be used to improve capacity that's needed due to growth. Your second question regarding why have a project list at all, it's not a requirement, and if council chose to do so, we could eliminate all parks and streets off of the project list and leave it at broad categories. We included it at this point in time because we have heard that these are some of the priority projects as identified now and wanted to acknowledge those.
Well, and that's fine. I don't want to get into another situation where it's to list is to limit, and this is what you said, and therefore that's what you're living with. And I'm also not going to agree to another program where it says, here, predict the future, because that's where we are right now, and so neither of those are acceptable. So if these are listed on here, then that may be fine, but on the other hand, if the general language is still going to prevail, then why put them on there? But that's not a deal breaker for me. Okay. With respect to the streets, again, Scott, you mentioned the monastery. There's the Campbell and Speedway thing. There's significant development that Richard's got going out around the bridges that I'm not sure we're seeing them in here. And I just want to make sure that we're not going to wind up buying into a project list, whether it's parks or streets or whatever, where the answer comes back next year. Well, you didn't have it on your list, and therefore, irrespective of the fact that you're building 225 units at Country Club and Speedway, you can't fund infrastructure in the surrounding area because it's not on your list.
So, Honorable Mayor and Council, that's what this method that's being proposed seeks to avoid. So you've got some projects on here, but you're allowed to add others based on the growth potential. You can come back and check on that on an annual basis. So as you see projects like the monastery or Mountain Enclave show up, that is the time to consider how you would shift those impact fee dollars around to address that.
Mr. Clark, what I'm hearing, and I'm sort of seeing nods around the table, is if that's allowable, then set out those criteria as sort of the headlight, and if you want to say in footnote, that may include but not necessarily include these projects because you kind of bookmarked them. And I think that's right. I think it come back to us with, or when you go out to the public, go out with some criteria that leave maximum flexibility. I think that's what we're hearing.
Generally, that's what I'm suggesting, because right now we're in a situation where we're being told you can't do that because you didn't predict it 5 years ago. And that's just... That's not reasonable.
Got it.
Okay. The other thing is there's no mention in any of the parks list of something very general and broad about public open space, and we're having conversations about green infrastructure fees and all that, but if we have the ability to purchase parcels of land that could turn into pocket parks or water retention detention basins that could solve some of those problems issues also, then that ought to be included as well, because those are legitimate impact fee uses as well, because they're building capacity to
I believe that is included here right now under the land acquisition category, so you have the opportunity to go after those.
I don't see it, but okay.
It's there.
All right, Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How will staff further meet with SABA, the chambers, MPA, the developers, and other business organizations to get this message out and get their input into this very important
Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Fimbres, we are going to continue to meet with them. We have had a very open dialogue with all of these stakeholders, and they have been involved in our stakeholder meetings we've held thus far. We are planning on scheduling another meeting towards the end of this month after we've hopefully released the report and they get a chance to look at it and have time to digest it. And we plan to have further meetings before we ask for any vote by mayor and council.
Richard, can you hold your questions, and anyone else hold your questions? I've got a request from Councilmember Romero. She needs to leave us in 10 minutes, and she wants to
Hold my.
knock the item 9 Menlo Park item off, which shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. So let me just go ahead and call that. We'll come back. Item 9, which is Menlo Park, was scheduled for 20 minutes. We now have 10 minutes. Councilmember Romero has requested a discussion regarding the development of a neighborhood plan for Menlo Park. Councilmember Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for making the adjustment. I really appreciate it. Menlo Park came to the Ward 1 Council office realizing back in the spring of 2018 that they did not have a specific plan for their neighborhood plan, that they were part of the Santa Cruz area plan, and that plan was written back in 1984. As you well know, there's been a lot of development and a lot happening within the Menlo Park neighborhood. And so from the spring of 2018 through this summer, we've been working in Ward 1 in conjunction with Menlo Park neighbors to figure out a way to pay and start the process of a neighborhood plan. The neighbors have been talking about using cellular antenna funds that were designated for Menlo Park. And so in conjunction with the ward and city staff and the neighbors in Menlo Park, they'd like to move forward the process of starting a neighborhood plan. We don't know yet how much funds will be used to put that neighborhood plan together, but there is a cellular antenna funds that we could tap into. So I'd like to move that we start the process of organizing and planning efforts for a Menlo Park neighborhood plan. I'm not there, so I don't know if their exact answer is there, the neighborhood president, and I don't know if he'd like to speak for a couple of minutes just to present to mayor and council where to go. If no one from the neighborhood is there, we also can move the agenda item.
Councilman Romero, Zach's here, but let me see if I get a second. And let's see.
I'll second the motion.
So we've got a motion and a second. Mr. Clark, is there anything you want to say about it? You're at the table. This probably falls into your work category.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Commissioner Romero, or Councilwoman Romero has brought this forward. It's required by UDC that Mayor and Council initiate a neighborhood plan. We're prepared to support that now. We've been working with them on a draft language, and we're prepared to help them develop a full neighborhood plan.
Okay. Anybody else on this then? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right. We'll go to work on that. All right, let's go back then to item 8, which...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, you got it. Thank you, Rahina. Let's go back to item 8, which is the development impact fees. I think, Richard, you were in the middle of your questioning.
Yes, sir. Will we be able to get financial breakdowns of impact fees for the proposed 3 service areas or the break into the wards?
So the allocation of funding for the future impact fee service area is going to be based on the growth that happens within your service area. So I don't know how I can answer that future question.
So we can't do it now, but...
In the future, you'll get an annual report of what's been collected and what is projected to be expended in your service area by the projects that are determined by growth or on the list.
And has the consultant been to all the wards and seeing all the growth in the high growth areas that we're seeing?
You want to answer that one?
Have they been to the south side and to the west side?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, we haven't done any field trips with the consultants, but they have been here several times and visited various parts of the city, and we've talked to them about the growth happening all over the community and the range of that. It's been part of our conversations to talk about how Tucson is urbanizing and developing in many parts and how to appropriately address that as we go forward.
And they've taken into consideration the new annexed areas into the city, which are mostly in Ward 5.
So any area that's been annexed into the city would be part of the update process as we go forward.
And we've had new impact fees because of Chamberlain, Drexel, and Country Club, the Morkin project on, it's called the Valencia Crossing, and also Home Goods, and then the Raytheon expansion. So those are things we'll make sure they're taking into consideration. But the neighborhood associations are concerned that money, because there's a lot of need there, and they may have a mistrust of the city because of the past behavior of the city officials, and they want to make sure what that goes. And you're just telling me that per statute ARS that it has to happen.
Right.
All right, so that's okay. Right. And who monitors that? Who audits that?
That's financial services, and I believe the state comes in and performs a biannual audit on it also. Correction?
If I could just correct that, we actually hire an external auditor to come out and audit.
Okay. How often is that done?
Every 2 years.
Councilmember, is that it? Okay, Councilmember Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When it comes to the assurance that impact fees collected in one area will be expended in that area because that's where it's coming from, how will those decisions be made? Because in the past, the decision has been made that if you use a certain street, like if you live in Rita Ranch, you obviously use the streets in the city of Tucson. Therefore, we're going to take your money from Rita Ranch and finish off Broadway, let's say, as an example. How flexible is that? And for example, is it an administrative decision that would be made to move money from one wealth-generating impact fee area to another, or would that have to go through the council offices or come to the table?
I'll answer. Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Scott, so we monitor that through our actual programming of the impact fee dollars, that it is spent in the area where it is collected. That is part of our audit. That's part of our financial accounting system. I don't believe legally we could move it from one area to another based on the state statute. The only exception to that would be if we did have a citywide streets overlay that was collecting money for the whole city. You could then, target where you're spending that money geographically for those regional projects. But that, again, is because there would be a citywide bucket that money would go in.
And that is not in, is that in your proposal or is that not in your?
So what we're trying to establish in the new proposal is an annual check-in with mayor and council where we come back and discuss the growth, the project list, and in what your preferences are in that service area where the priority should go. So now you'll see an annual check-in where we discuss how the program's laying out.
That's reassuring because I think that it's very clear when you see the parks project list how few parks there are in the southeast side versus those that are available in other places. We are very much underparked, and that's very sad. Yes, we all use arterial lanes, and so I just want to be sure that, and I consider Houghton Road an arterial lane. I think a lot of people use it, and just ask those who live out there. So I think that's important for us to note that those monies currently, the impact fees, are used to match the RTA projects, and there are no extra monies to give the improvements that the people in the new neighborhoods are expecting to get, such as a nice new park, etc. So I think we're very watchful of that these days. We're very happy with the way things are going generally, but I want to make sure that in the future there is solid commitment to actually invest in the area very specifically where the impact fees are generated. It's very important to all of us.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Mayor, just maybe a point you can consider as we go down this path. There's a couple of issues here that I think are important and we'll need direction from you on. As Scott outlined, 35 to 40% of the streets impact fees would go towards a regional plan, and that's a policy decision. I mean, you don't have to do that, and so we're going to need some direction on that at some point. The rest of that, 60 to 65%, would go towards those service areas. But if the council is not interested in a citywide, a portion for streets citywide, then we need to have that discussion fairly quick so that we can start moving in a different direction. But that is something that I need some direction on from you as you go through this discussion, because I think it's an important point moving forward.
Mr. Manager, I would at least like to put that idea out to the stakeholders and see what comes back. It's the stakeholders who are kind of paying for this. And it's a bit of a 6 of one, half dozen the other, because if you look at the example list, there's probably stuff that crosses all the wards. What I'm concerned about going forward is those matches that we're basically obligated for in the RTA, a plan that's still in place and still got some years to go. And it would be nice to have those funds available from other than her funds, essentially. But I'm not saying that if the stakeholders come back or we all come back and say, no, that's not the way to go, well, then you'll have to go to Plan B. But I wouldn't want to exclude Plan A, if that you want to call it that right now. But that's me.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick point. It is my suggestion and recommendation you consider a portion of the streets piece for a regional investment. I think it's important. I think it's an opportunity for us. And as you outlined, a lot of those roads cross multiple wards and in some instances multiple service areas. So I think the conversation really is, we'll go back and bring a recommendation from the stakeholders. I'm not sure we've done that yet, but we will certainly do that. But I just wanted to, we need to be thinking about that, because that does change the approach on a couple of different fronts, both on the local funding or the local match, if you will, RTA, as well as what we do with those future projects on the streets level. So we'd be happy to continue to have that dialogue with the stakeholders.
Well, and the reason I'm interested to see what the stakeholders say is because in the past, I know certain stakeholders have said, well, wait a second, I'm building here, how come that money's not right here? And if the stakeholders come back on transportation issues and say, which they might, oh no, we get that because our people live in this neighborhood, but they travel all over the city and we want to see this thing completed. But it'll be an interesting, I just want to see what they have to say. That's where I'm at. Councilmember Durham, I'm sorry.
Just for the record, though, that's not my Plan A. It was your Plan A, my Plan A. I'm not supportive right now of doing a regional transportation. That's what we have with the RTA. That's why people are paying a half-cent sales tax. That's going to be the whole gist of RTA 2 going out to the voters. And so I'm more in a camp right now of saying if the money is generated in a particular service area, then keep it there.
I hear you, and I'm just saying I want that the stakeholders to hear it. The other thing is, going to that is, this is a 5-year plan, right? So this doesn't even get to RTA 2. This money's still all RTA 1 money.
Bill.
So, Councilman Durham, we'll get to you, but I'm trying to get Councilman Fimbres done. I'm sorry.
Okay, the RTA regional projects in the city, can we get a list of those, which are pending still, to see them?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, the list on the screen is all of the RTA projects which the city has committed dollars to are in that citywide list right now. It does not include all projects that are included in Prop 407 or 101 because there is some overlap, but not necessarily is there always overlap. Yes, there is a distinction between those.
Okay.
What are you saying, that the project list under streets that you have up there now on the far left is all that's left for the city in the RTA?
So those are the RTA projects that have been identified from our transportation department that the city has matching dollars to go towards.
But that's not all the city RTA projects left.
I see one big one missing.
Yeah.
It could have been an oversight on my part, and I apologize if that's the case.
I'll give you a clue, Broadway. Councilmember Durham?
That the project list needs to be as descriptive and general as possible, as we can get away with. So I'll just register that thought. Would the infrastructure improvement plans and land use assumptions be made available to the public for comment?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Durham, our plan is after this meeting, and we've received direction from council to post those reports to the city's website for public review and comment, and we anticipate having lots of discussion on them.
Okay. That's my only two questions.
Councilmember Cunningham.
You know, part of, as we try to build neighborhoods one at a time, we start taking a look at quality of life issues in each neighborhood. Ultimately, we want our square miles to be strong, every square mile to be competitive, whether it has apartments, whether it has condos, whether it has single-family residences. What you're going to find out as you get east of Alvernon is that most neighborhoods have all of them. One of the things that I noticed as you peruse through those square miles is that a lot of neighborhoods, not all, but a lot, have a park, a pool, a school, and a church. They have those four things in common. And we actually would probably, if we want to increase our quality of life footprint, we want to try to get that goal all the way across. It doesn't have to be a public pool. It can be a neighborhood-owned pool. It doesn't necessarily have to be a public school. It can be a private school. But having those things in each square mile allows a quality of life in a neighborhood sense of self in each place in Tucson. We have a new park project list, and some of those areas with empty lots don't have parks on them. We also have the dividing line at Wilmot, which is pretty interesting because you could literally have a small development just west of it, Wilmot, and then just east of Wilmot have a decent spot for a park, and then not be able to build it with those funds when the people that we have would use it. So when we talk about these overlays, I don't really want to take 30 or 40%, but I would be willing to say, hey, what about a 10% or 20%, a more modest percentage in a floating zone, but not just for streets, for parks. Here's the deal with streets. We've got people who cross town all the time, especially from Ward 2. They travel from the east side to the airport. They travel from east side to the aerospace corridor. They travel from east side to downtown. I am totally okay with using those impact fees to improve their commute, especially if we're making enhancements on golf links, for instance, especially if we're making enhancements on Speedway, for instance. The other thing I think we have to take a look at is, you're going to tell me that nobody who lives outside of out of Area B never goes to High Corbett Field? What if we want to partner with our partners at High Corbett Field to make some enhancements? And so those things with a 10% cream top, cream cheese, whatever you want, overlay, whatever you want to call it, a regional 10% kind of luxury tax that goes into a pot for services that either the council or committee can agree on that serves the whole public, that does make sense to me. There's a couple things that I'm looking at on the fee schedule. I kind of think we need to lock up the fee schedule so it's not so detailed. In other words, we're basically encouraging you to build small, teeny apartments, and we're penalizing you if you're building nicer stuff. And I think that sliding scale should have a ceiling and a basement. That's pretty congruent to our current impact fees. I like the idea that we're going to increase the portion of impact fee into Parks and Rec. But I'd also say that there's some value in certain things that developers do. For instance, if they build a community with an HOA and decide to own their own roads, we get value for that because we don't have to maintain those roads. If we have a community or a developer that builds a community and they're willing to build a public park and make it part of the public land trust and also use part of their HOA to maintain that park, not all of it, we'd help too, that's value to us. And there has to be credits available for them. Now, I know that there's some controversy on whether or not we have to replace those funds with general fund dollars. And for me, if we don't have to replace them with general fund dollars, then I can have that discussion. If we have to replace those funds with general fund dollars, it's not starter. We have to change that rule. So that's kind of one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about credits. Can we bring back the slide that says 37%, 34%, 29%? In what years are we talking about, like 1950 to 1990? What years do we, yeah.
Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Cunningham, it's the last 5 years of collection of impact fees.
So the last 5 years, Area C has measured 37% of growth. Now, does that include residential and commercial, or
Yes.
just residential?
It's all fees.
See, so I'd love to have that disambiguated by residential, because residential is what generates the park impact fees, and those are really the crux of the dollars that we've talked about the most. The other thing is that you're going to tell me we're going to only charge $1,400 in impact fees for a small apartment, when usually they're the ones who need the park the most. So I'm just kind of going down the list here and saying we might want to reconsider that and meet with our stakeholders and our neighbors to see what kind of things we can do. You mentioned that we're going to have an update every year. Does that mean you can add or alter the project list every year, or are we locked in?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, the way that we've structured the project list now is to be flexible so that every year we can address needs as needed due to growth.
So this is kind of one of the examples. This is a great example. We have a 14 home little development going on the east side, maybe off the top of my head, near the Palo Verde Park. I wouldn't know anything about that. But the bottom line is that goes in, and now some impact fees are generated, and that can go into building a shade structure for the Palo Verde Park to increase the capacity, as well as adding maybe 4 baskets to the existing basketball court. That'll increase the park's capacity. It'll also provide shade. That's like a pretty appropriate use of impact fees, in my opinion. But then the developer says, you know what? I have this 1.5 acres where I want to add a small splash pad and a playground, and I'm even going to have a pool. And so the answer then becomes, okay, is it going to be used by just the people who live in the HOA, or can it be used by others outside the HOA? And if they say yes, it can be used by others by the HOA, are we allowed to give credits for that?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, so the way the current system functions is you have to have the project on the project list to get what is called an offset or a credit to the developer. So if they want to build that infrastructure in lieu of paying the fee, it has to be on the project list. With our current proposal, if we create more flexibility in the project list, it allows for more situations where a developer can meet some of that need, build some of that infrastructure, and we can provide the offset to them. There would have to be some established criteria to make sure that that's appropriate. They could overbuild potentially, but only receive credit for the portion that is necessitated by their development. So there are some kind of caveats to that, but it's more possible with this kind of structure on our project list.
And look, I'm not saying I want to do too many giveaways. I mean, I'd like to cap some of the credits, but the bottom line is that if we're getting amenities, there's value there, especially if we're getting amenities that are going to be maintained by an HOA that comes in. So I think there's some value there. The last thing I want to talk about is I want to go back to this floating zone idea where, again, we have a situation where if I build a park, if I collect, say I have on this current fee structure, which may not be the fee structure when we do it, but on this current fee structure, a person goes into area B, but they're right near the borderline of areas C and A. See where I think that looks like it's probably right around Swan and 22nd, or Swan and Golf Links, where areas A, B, and C converge. Can we all agree on that? So in that area, somebody builds a project there for 20, 30 things. I'd love to have the opportunity to say, hey, look, in every project we build in A, B, or C, we're going to take 10% and put that into a central fund, and we can use that kind of as needed, especially when the project's nearby the borderline. And I don't want to make it like 35 or 40% because, truth be told, neighbors and council people are territorial. We want to make sure we're protecting our constituents and making sure we're getting what we want. So when I look at that, I'm saying, okay, we can have some type of 10% peel off that can go into a central fund to do these type of projects, but we don't have to just limit it to streets. We can do parks too. And I think that would probably make a lot more sense, not only to stakeholders and not only the neighborhoods, but also to the people on this side of the table. So those are kind of the things I'm looking at.
Go ahead.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, so there's a couple bits of information I'd like to provide on that. The reason and the rationale that we did not propose a citywide parks fund, there are two. One being ARS restricts what you can spend impact fee dollars on for parks amenities. So in practice, you can't really build a regional park with impact fee dollars. So there needs to be a nexus between the area that you're proposing that funds go into and the demand. So if you can't build a regional park, you theoretically should not be collecting regional park dollars.
So this goes back to the kind of the crux of the situation we're in. If somebody builds a project at a good example would be like Wrightstown in Pantano or Wrightstown in Camino Seco. They build a project, it's landlocked, there's no space to put in another park. There already is a park outside of the city nearby, and in the meantime, there's a near area, or there's a great piece of land to build a park that's just over the line. Why wouldn't you? Why can't you use? You can't use impact fees there too. That's why I'm getting. In other words,
So, Honorable Mayor and Council, what I'm understanding is you are concerned that in the central area of Tucson, where you've got the three borders joining, and you have a park show up or a development show up just on the other side of a border, and you're not able to construct a park just 100 so feet away because you can't collect the funds.
I want to have that leeway. Not even 100. I mean, it could be a quarter mile, but still, it makes sense to be able to do that.
What you're seeking for staff to look at is, can we create a floating zone in those kind of areas that would collect funds, the fund parks where you have those kind of border issues?
That's basically exactly.
And actually, I mean, Paul's picked out the one where you've brought all three of them together, so that's pretty easy. But, you know, it goes across Area A and Area B, Area C and Area B, all the way across. And maybe that isn't a bad idea to see if you can put a floating zone that would be able to address within X.
My principal planner has given me permission to look into that. So
okay. The second piece I want to talk about, the last thing I want to bring up today is on park projects. We have this park project list. Can we bring the park project list pretty up? So for Area C, for instance, Robert Price, which we haven't built yet, but there's another unnamed park that we're going to have to build in Ward 4. We know it. We've got some money for it. But we need to put that on the list now. Also, we know we're going to do some things that we're going to add to at Jesse Owens and Palo Verde. We haven't completed all the things we want to do there. We need to add those things to that list now. I don't want to wait and have to. I don't want to have to wait to invest in our parks. We've taken painstaking efforts in Ward 2 to improve all the parks in our area, and I don't want to be. I don't want a neighborhood left out in the cold or holding the bag because they weren't included on the list because of an administrative error. So I want to make sure that our project list is very, very comprehensive. In other words, if there's a project and we have a plan for it going back to 1990, then put it on the list. That way we don't have to wait. We can prioritize it differently, but if we have figured it, if we have proposed it, it should be on the list because you never know what people are going to want. Who knows? Maybe the number one sport in 2 years will be cricket, and we'll have to put in cricket fields. But the bottom line is that we should be prepared for any of those contingencies.
Scott, when do you intend to, whatever we give instruction on today, when do you intend to start publishing something and going to stakeholders?
Honorable Mayor and Council, we were hoping to get something out on Friday, August 9th. That might take us a little bit longer given the input, but I'm thinking the next 21 days now.
Well, okay, but I heard that over there. I mean, I think you ought to give it at least a week to digest so if Paul has two parks, one unnamed.
But the point is, based on what we were told, the parks don't need to be listed for them to be included later on. That's the value of having the general language. So you can put 25 parks on there if you want, but next week you can add another one.
I thought we could only do it once a year. Did I misread the conversation?
So the annual review will be an automatic thing so that you'll have the opportunity to review at least that often, but you are not restricted to reviewing your IIP to just once per year. Right. You can review it as needed as issues come up. And I think the issue of being able to amend the IIP and review the projects annually or more frequently is going to address a lot of these questions you have about flexibility. That's a far more legally sound way to do it than to go forward with an IIP that doesn't list any projects. And so there is value in the listing of the projects because we have to have a place to start from. And we have to have a place that we can, with a straight face, point to and say, these are the types of projects that we are planning to fund with impact fees. And that's how we're basing our fee calculation.
It's
at the end
totally
of the
fair,
day.
as long as we don't hear any time in the next 5 years to list as to limit, you didn't put it on there.
Yeah, and what I heard from Councilmember Kozaczek, and I think Scott and Alicia heard, was have good language that meets the statute at the front of it, a maybe but not limited to. I mean, I don't know how, exactly what the statutory language looks like, but I think that we just want to make sure that we've got that flexibility so that when Paul comes back next year and says, oh, crickets exploded in my neighborhood, that we can do something.
Right. But I also want there to be reasonable expectations about, some of the examples that are being brought up. Some of these things like park amenities, as Lisa was pointing out, there are also statutory limitations on what types of amenities can actually be funded with impact fees, okay? So you may hear as time goes on, no, we can't fund that with impact fees because it's not, there's a statutory limitation.
That would be a different conversation than you can't do it because it's not on the list.
Right.
If the answer is you can't do it because it's not an appropriate use of impact fees, that's one thing.
Correct.
If it's, it's an appropriate use, but you didn't list it in 2019, then that's different.
Right.
Okay. So I think staff needs direction. I know what they'd like to hear is can we take this report, maybe with some input that you've gotten today, and start to go out to the public. So we would need that
So
motion.
moved.
Okay, we have a second for that? Second. I guess my question is, you've heard some input today. I see people taking notes. I'm assuming that some of that's going to be included. I guess if you could send back out to us what the final product is so that we know what, when the constituents start calling, the stakeholders start calling, we at least know what the public has, that would be very helpful. Anybody else? All right. If not, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? It's a gargantuan process. Okay, let's go to item 10, GPLET for 117 North 6th Avenue. Staff will present the results of economic analysis for 117 North 6th Avenue. I think I see Barbara.
We've got it in the material. It's a vacant building. Direct benefits are more than 2 times the foregone taxes. I would just move that we adopt the GPLET.
Second.
We got a motion and second. Any other discussion on this matter? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you, Councilmember Kozaczek.
And it's the actual approval is on tonight as well.
That's right. I'm sorry. We'll do that again tonight. State and national legislation. I see Mr. Greenhill approaching. Mr. Greenhill, I don't know if you have an update or you just want to answer some questions.
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, members of the council, I'm happy to answer questions. I distributed answers to questions from Councilmember Fimbres yesterday. They had to do with federal budget, the electric bus grant, some other issues. I'm happy to answer any questions about those.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Greenhill?
Yeah.
So the postal reform,
Sure.
and I know they didn't meet in July, and they're on break now, so when's the next meeting? I know they're pushing a letter that was drafted by our people, Terry Bracey and their folks.
Right.
Trying to get that signed. Can we get a copy of that letter to make sure they covered everything?
Yeah, absolutely. Honorable Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Fimbres, we do expect a postal reform bill to be introduced in September. There's a bipartisan group that's working on the details. As always, as soon as there's a draft, we will bring that to Mayor and Council. But yes, we are working on a letter that would be co-signed by all the Arizona delegation that would be in support of Arizona's interests, and in particular Tucson's and Cherry Belle's interests in postal reform. We hope to have that letter by the end of this week, and I will distribute that to mayor and council once it's available.
Then the Military National Defense Authorization Act, PFAS and PFOS provisions. It says that including blood testing for PFAS as part of the routine medical physicians for military firefighters. What about the civilians and everybody else that works on the bases and do professional? Did they leave them out, or is it going to be encompassing for them?
I believe that it encompasses them as well. As I mentioned before, there are differing provisions in both the House and Senate bills on the PFAS. We are working pretty diligently on these to make sure that whatever passes could provide some support for Tucson Water and the city of Tucson as we approach our need to remediate for the PFAS that we've discovered in our system.
And my last question, Mr. Mayor, is that SNAP proposed rule will cut food stamps for children, public comment period, open until September 23rd. Did we send a letter in opposition to cutting the food stamp?
I thought we had.
Well, on this particular proposal, I don't believe we have. This
Can we do that? Can I need a
Sure.
motion? So I move that we send a letter in opposition to the cutting of food stamps for children and add that to the public comment so that our city's represented.
Get a second? Got a motion and a second to send a letter, public comment letter regarding the SNAP proposal. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, we'll do it. We'll do it, Andrew.
That's all I got.
Okay, anybody else have anything for Mr. Greenhill?
I have questions on the state legislature.
Sure.
And what the governor signed into bills and how it's going to impact the city.
Sure. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, the enactment date for all bills, other than bills that pass with emergency clauses, that were passed in the last legislative session, they all go into effect August 27th. So before our next council meeting, a few hundred bills will go into effect as state law. There's about 100 or so bills that the League of Cities and Towns has identified as bills that would be of interest to cities. And in my written comments or answers to the questions, I sent a link to that report that lists all the bills. Some examples of those bills that I put in my answers, there's a couple that have to do with short-term rentals, otherwise known as Airbnbs. There's a bill that makes it clear that that the Department of Revenue shall collect taxes, local taxes on the rentals of Airbnbs and other short-term rentals. There's another one that makes sure that cities can regulate against on short-term rentals if they have parties or have uses in those properties that aren't allowable under the underlying zoning. There was an electric scooters bill, and that passed, but again, we fought hard to make sure that it didn't preempt cities. So that bill passed and will go into effect. So there's a number of bills that are of interest, of course, to the city of Tucson, including the Wayfair. And so that's just some examples of bills that will go into effect August 27th.
Now, I understand the governor is proposing to bring forth gun legislation again,
Yes.
background checks and things, and I think in lieu of all the tragedies we've been seeing in this country, there's been 252 tragedies in 2019 alone. I think we should be getting behind this and also asking them to revisit this gun legislation.
Sure. Yeah. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, a couple of years ago, the governor was pushing some legislation that it was focused on school safety, but it included something what they call stop orders, severe threat orders of protection. At the time when there was some legislation being proposed, I worked with the Tucson Police Department to make sure we understood what that would mean for us. We had some comments, some concerns about that last proposal. That legislation ended up not going anywhere. There was no proposal this past legislative session. Recently, the governor has said that they intend to move forward with a similar proposal in the next session. Obviously, if they do, I'll bring it to mayor and council, but it'll be very important to work with TPD to make sure it's something that adds to safety and doesn't create some undue burdens.
Okay, anything else for Mr. Greenhill? If not, let's move on to item 12, the discussion of the regular agenda. Does anyone have any item to remove from the consent agenda?
I was going to ask the city manager about the jail bed cost increases, just so I don't have to pull it, if you could just, and I know they're talking about pretrial services being entered, but do we have a time date when they're going to implement that to save us dollars? Because I've seen it rose pretty drastically. Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, we have been working with the Clinton County, as you know, to move pretrial services outside of the jail walls. They are very close. We met with them last week. That was a topic. Mr. Huckleberry was going to give me a date. I don't have that yet. I can get that to you as soon as I receive that.
And we're looking at other ways to do alternatives to incarceration. I know we've got some pretty active programs with the courts and also with TC3 and some of the things that the MIST unit's doing, but I think we need to look at that because it's jumped up. I know it's not where it was when I first started in 2009 or 2009, but we're starting to jump up again.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, in addition to those areas that you mentioned in your report there, one of the reasons that the cost is increasing is because of the medical. There is a significant cost both in medical as well as mental health, and those costs are just continuing to go up based on the requirement for care. We're working with the county on that. We've talked about different strategies up to and including partnering with other agencies to reduce those costs. So we'll continue on that track.
And with that, I know they got the MacArthur grant. They got some things looking at alternatives to incarceration, kicking people out. But I'm hearing that they have such a staff shortage right now in the correctional facilities that they're cutting programming and everything else. So how are we preparing these folks to be released from custody, and where are they going to go? Are they going to go right back into the system and raise our numbers up again? So those are questions I have. What are we doing with the MacArthur grant? Maybe we should have a study session with those folks to talk about this issue.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, be happy to have conversations with the county about maybe making a presentation. Just to refresh your memory, we actually have established a joint position that will track data points for us, both in the justice system as well as in the county justice system as well as the city justice system. Part of that analysis is to look at, again, what the MacArthur grant is dealing with in terms of repeat users or violators, the opportunity for us to try to get them help ahead of time. Be happy to reach out to the county and get them to come and make a presentation or give us a report so that you can have that at your fingertips moving forward. You're welcome.
Okay, anything else for this part of it? Okay, item 13, does anybody have any items for future agenda? If not, we will stand adjourned and come back at 5:30. Thank you.